you wouldn't have any motu, you wouldn't have any indult, you wouldn't have any of those other things if he had not done what he did. If he had not insisted on retaining the traditional Mass and denouncing the new Mass, and if he had not built up a resistance to it throughout the world, those modernists never would have conceded even jelly beans to the traditional movement. That I think should be said, that they have what they have because of Archbishop Lefebvre, whom they condemn in principle. So that's my opinion anyway. As far as, but you have a broad spectrum, but I think what Father Cicada said is accurate, that in a general way he did keep the torch of anti-Vatican II going, and he kept the torch of the traditional Mass going. And from that point of view, I think everyone sees him as, to a greater or lesser extent, a rallying point.
So let me follow up on that question. If that's the assessment, broadly speaking, what is the Sedevacantists assessment of the Archbishop? Because I think this ties back to my original question of people being in shock that you'd have such nice things to say about the Archbishop. When you deal with your seminarians, when you deal with the faithful, people who either know or don't know the Archbishop, what is the Archbishop like from that perspective?
Well, I mean, you keep it on the level of ideas. I mean, his personal virtues are a separate issue from some of his ideas, which were incorrect, and his approach to fighting the battle against Vatican II. So it's a division between the person and the principle on the level of ideas.
He set down all of the principles of Sedevacantism, but never drew the conclusion. His pointing out that Vatican II was the source of all of the problem establishes the principles of Sedevacantism.
Yeah.
Or his pointing out that the new Mass is something wrong establishes the principles of Sedevacantism. As a matter of fact, Cardinal Sedevacantism in 1974 cornered him on that very point. Are you saying then that the Mass that the Roman Pontiff has promulgated to the entire Church is wrong, that it is evil? Is that what you're saying? That was the question, essentially. And Archbishop Lefebvre understood exactly where he was going with it, and he backed off. The answer should have been yes, I'm saying that, and then the next conclusion would be Paul VI is not the true Roman Pontiff, because the Church is incapable of promulgating something evil. But he understood that, and you see, that's why I say he gave all of the principles of Sedevacantism, but never drew the conclusion. And that's how I would assess him.
And when you say that, Your Excellency, I think about that famous quote from the suspension in 1976. Were both of you back in America at that point? Were either of you in the seminary when he gave that speech on his suspension on Divinis?
I think that was that the hot summer one, the Lille speech? I was in the United States at the time. I think we all were, because that was in August. Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
I wanted to read that, and I wanted to know, then or now, if you would take any question with what he said here. And for those who've never heard this from the Archbishop, having had a chance to reflect on what he did and what His Excellency just shared about that story of Cardinal Sedevacantists, what it means to sort of stare at this precipice. So this was on reflections on his suspension in 1976. He says, "We are suspended ad divinis by the conciliar church, from the conciliar church to which we have no wish to belong. The conciliar church is a schismatic church because it breaks with the Catholic Church that has always been. It has its new dogmas, its new priesthood, its new institutions, its new worship, all already condemned by the Church in many a document, official and definitive. This is why the founders of the conciliar church insist so much on obedience to today's church, prescinding from yesterday's church as though it no longer existed. This conciliar church is schismatic because it has taken as a basis for its updating principles opposed to those of the Catholic Church. This conciliar church is therefore not Catholic. To whatever extent Pope, bishops, priests, or faithful adhere to this new church, they separate themselves from the Catholic Church. For people who look at that, and now with you got the strict observance of the society, where it's saying they're trying to get back to the principles of Archbishop Lefebvre, some people would say, well, look, here are the principles of Archbishop Lefebvre. Why dodge what the Archbishop said here? Did you agree with what he said in 1976? Do you agree now? And what do you think the implications of agreeing with that quote from the Archbishop are?
Well, I think that is one column that belongs in the right-hand column of Archbishop Lefebvre. But I could cite to you other texts that are so accommodationist and reconciliationist, so to speak. As a matter of fact, let me finish that sentence, that are equally accommodationist as that is anti-accommodationist. I mean, there are many, many quotes and facts, things that he did that point to the soft side. So that's point number one. Point number two is, I think in that speech, in that very speech, he makes reference to reconciling with the modernists at the end. I'm almost certain it's in that same speech. You have to look at the whole Lefebvre. You can't look at an isolated side of him. He never abandoned the idea of reconciling with the modernists. He never actually ever abandoned it. And I think that was the tragic flaw. He is, almost like a Greek tragic hero. Somebody loaded with all of these virtues and power but that one flaw of wanting to reconcile with the modernists ruined a lot of. It ruined him in the sense that it put him on a contradictory path, and so you can double column him, and you would say, is this the same person speaking? See, so the one cancels the other. I mean, what was there, I would, in most grosso modo, agree with. I mean, there's a few things I would alter in it, but I could put another quote against it that would dissolve all of that. So it has no teeth.
Which is why a year or so ago, when the controversy came to the fore in the Society of St. Pius X between Bishop Fellay on one side and as an accommodationist, and the other bishops on the other side is supposedly non-accommodationist, that they both could cite the Archbishop,
yes,
and be perfectly correct.
Yes.
In one column and another, the left hand and the right hand column, and that is indeed the tragedy.
When you're speaking in contradictories, the truth does not cancel out the falsehood. When you're speaking in contradictories, it what happens is that you just get nothing. In the sense that neither is correct, neither is true. Both are the truth does not redeem the false in a contradictory situation. So what is true? Is his soft side or his truth or his hard side? And whatever you want. That's the problem with him, and I think it was a tragic flaw. That idea that he originally had of getting his society approved in these various dioceses. That was the precise reason of going to Covington, if you recall. That was in that whole idea, and at that time that seemed to be a correct thing to do. But what he did not do, I think, was develop as the Novus Ordo developed. I think that he should have said at a certain point, well, it's obvious, just exactly what he said there, obvious that this is a breakaway religion and that we can have nothing to do with it, and then draw the practical conclusions therefrom. But he never did that.
And from our own point of view, I remember listening to these different statements that he made, the sort of the right-hand statements, and you would think that, well, maybe he finally is going to do it. Mm-hmm. But, of course, he never did, because he would turn around and say something else that would be accommodationist. So, obviously, that was quite disappointing.
Yeah.
But he could have had the whole thing in his hands and done, I think, much more than he did, to against the errors of Vatican II, if he had stuck to the hard line. But
yes, which is typical of saints, to stick to the hard line.
Yeah.
I mean, look up the lives of especially saints who are opposing heresy. Find one that has in any way soft-pedaled the heresy, either in word or in act. Find one.
Yes.
Well, Your Excellency, Father, I don't think anyone would expect to hear anything other than the words "hard line" in any sentence associated with either of you or with Restoration Radio in general. But I suppose I want to tie into what you're saying and sort of bring our show to a conclusion today by talking about those who, like me, when we came into the traditional movement, Archbishop Lefebvre, as you say, is a sort of monumental figure. We looked at him, and so how many times have I heard someone say, well, the Archbishop was never Sedevacantist, so that's why I'm not Sedevacantist. I'm not smarter than or holier than the Archbishop. And you've just given them a whole bunch of ammunition about how the Archbishop was a holy man. So, I mean, how do we know better than a holier person? I'm a simple Catholic. I don't know anything. The Archbishop was smarter than me. He didn't go Sedevacantist. I'm not going to go Sedevacantist. There are quite a few of our listeners who find themselves in that camp. I was one of them myself years ago. How would you respond to them?
That the Catholic Church transcends Archbishop Lefebvre. That Archbishop Lefebvre was, in many ways, a great man, that he was a great bishop, but that the Catholic Church and its sacred doctrine and theology far transcends any one person, and that the criterion is our conformity to the principles of Catholicism, not our conformity to an archbishop, one archbishop in the church. Because you could take that same argument and apply it to the whole Novus Ordo hierarchy. Look at all of those Catholic bishops of Vatican II, how they were very pleased with Vatican II. Who am I to say that Vatican II is wrong, when only a handful of bishops were opposed to it? You could take exactly the same argument and apply it there, so we should all be blowing up balloons. It's true. If you're going to apply the argument of authority, where do you end up with the argument of authority? We follow and that was one of the problems we always bumped into with our European brethren, was that we followed the Archbishop to the extent that he was faithful to the principles that he had enunciated to us, which were in conformity with the teaching of the Catholic Church. And if he deviated from that, even whether in thought or in fact and indeed, we would deviate from him. That we would not follow him down that path, that we always held to that. And he always knew that we were of that mind, and he was always uncomfortable with us Americans for that reason. And don't forget that all of us had been in Novus Ordo seminaries. A lot of the European seminarians had not been in Novus Ordo seminaries. We had witnessed firsthand all of the horrors of the Novus Ordo, and we wanted nothing to do with them. And also we had fought against our superiors and the rectors of seminaries and various other individuals set over us based on Catholic principles. That was our weapon, so to speak, Catholic principle. And we were ready to do the same if ever the Archbishop Lefebvre were to present us with something that was not in conformity with Catholicism or its practices or disciplines. That's what I would say.
Yes, and particularly the last part is something that I'd like to emphasize, that I saw many very holy and very edifying men compromise the Catholic faith. And the fact that they were personally holy and personally edifying and had good intentions was one thing, but you cannot stand together with someone who compromises the Catholic faith in any way, shape, or form. And so it was always in my case, and certainly in the case of I think all of the older Americans who got involved with the Society of St. Pius X and Archbishop Lefebvre, was the question of principles. That there was Catholic principles and Catholic doctrine we were there for. And if someone did not represent those principles or contradicted that doctrine, it was time to go.